The whipcracker overseer's arrival marked a turn in the tide for the slaves on the Harrison plantation, where once there was a semblance of leniency. A reign of terror took hold. The plantation, once a place of suffering cloaked in pretenses of civility, now wore its brutality in plain sight. The overseer was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and towering. His mere presence cast a shadow of terror, his whip an extension of his ruthlessness. Even his voice, a guttural growl, seemed to reverberate with echoes of pain and suffering. Every infraction, however minute, was met with a punishment, and not just any punishment, but a very public one. The overseer believed in setting examples and using fear as his tool to maintain order and obedience. "See this," he barked one day, pointing at a pile of cotton not up to his standard. "This is unacceptable." John, the unfortunate picker of said cotton, was dragged into the center of the plantation. The overseer's whip found its mark on John's back. The sharp crack, followed by a pained groan. The rest of the slaves watched, their hearts pounding in the chests, their eyes filled with terror and helplessness. The harsh punishments, delivered under the scorching sun, became an eerie spectacle. The overseer, his whip, and the tormented cries of their kin, a nightmarish tableau etched deep into their memories. The overseer's reign of terror transformed the plantation into a house of horrors. Fear hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, a constant reminder of their harsh reality. The slaves lived in constant dread, the fear of the overseer's whip overshadowing their every action. "Better not drop any cotton, Tricia," Norris whispered one evening as they huddled in their quarters. "You saw what he did to John." Tricia nodded, her face pale. "I'm scared, Norris. We all are." Silently, they held each other, seeking comfort in their shared fear. But even as fear permeated their lives, so did a sense of unity. They were in this together, suffering together, surviving together. Amid the terror, they found strength in each other, their shared experiences forging a bond that not even the overseer's whip could break. In the midst of the turmoil and relentless cruelty, an oddity started to emerge. It was a bitter twist of reality, a knife in the side of an already aching wound. Despite the brutalities, the ruthless punishments, and the atmosphere of terror, the Harrison plantation was operating more smoothly than it ever had. In the cotton fields, the slaves toiled in synchronized rhythm, their actions coordinated with a precision that was almost mechanical. There was a new sense of urgency, a newfound efficiency that seeped into the very soil they cultivated. Every single hand was utilized, every single minute accounted for, and the result was evident in the yield. The cotton bales grew in size, the sugar cane taller, and the profits soared. Mr. Harrison, ensconced in his mansion, reveled in this efficiency. The new whipcracker overseer was worth every cent he was paid. The plantation thrived, and so did his coffers. Yet, beneath the veneer of this efficiency, the souls of those who toiled and suffered withered. Norris and John, bruised but unbowed, found themselves standing in the cotton field one evening, watching as the last of the cotton bales were loaded onto the wagons. "Hard to believe it, isn't it?" Norris murmured, his gaze on the bustling plantation. "Despite everything, we're doing better." John nodded, his heart heavy. We're a well-oiled machine now, aren't we?" he said bitterly. "But at what cost, Norris?" Norris turned to John, his eyes filled with sorrow and a touch of guilt. "We're surviving, John. That's what we're doing. That's the cost of our survival." The paradox weighed heavily on them. The cruelly won efficiency filled their days with relentless work, but also brought a twisted sense of pride. They were working harder, yielding more, but it was under the shadow of the whip and the threat of punishment. The plantation was more efficient, but their spirits, Their dreams were being crushed under the weight of their daily grind. That night, under the faint glow of the moonlight, the slaves gathered in their quarters. In hushed voices, they talked about the day, about the ruthless efficiency, about the paradox they found themselves in. "There's a word for it, Amy," one of the house slaves said softly. "It's called Pyrrhic, a Pyrrhic victory." "Pyrrhic," Tricia echoed. Amy nodded. "It's a victory that inflicts such a devastating toll on the victor that it is tantamount to defeat. We're more efficient, but at what cost? What have we lost in the process?" Their silence that followed was an answer in itself. They had lost more than they had gained. They were surviving, but at what cost? The plantation was thriving, but their spirits were not. They were efficient, but they were also more broken than they had ever been, and therein lay their bitter harvest. The sun had set on the Harrison plantation, but within the quarters of the enslaved, a different kind of darkness had taken root. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of the night, but a silence born out of fear and resignation. Amy Harrison, the house slave, sat with Tricia, John, and Norris, their faces barely visible in the dim glow of the dying fire. Their conversation hushed, as if they feared even their whispers would whip them into obedience. "It's like we're living with a shadow over us," Amy began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every waking moment, we're in fear. Fear of the whip, fear of the whip, fear of the overseer. It's like we've lost the ability to breathe freely." Tricia nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "We work harder. We work faster. Not because we want to, but because we fear what will happen if we don't." John, silent till then, looked at them. In the face of such psychological trauma, their individual identities were being subsumed by their collective fear. They were no longer Amy, John, Norris, or Tricia. They were the slaves, the efficient machines powering the plantation. Norris, ever the silent observer, spoke up then. "It's the mind, you see," he said. His voice was soft, but each word was crystal clear. "They're not just breaking our bodies with the work and the whip. They're breaking our minds too." A heavy silence descended upon them. Norris's words, stark and brutal in their honesty, had laid bare the harsh truth of their existence. The psychological toll was far greater than the physical one. The whip left scars on their bodies, but the fear it instilled scarred their minds. "And the worst part," John added, his voice filled with a mix of anger and desperation, "is that it's working. We're working harder. We're more efficient. But at what cost?" Tricia's voice trembled as she spoke. The night wore on, and their hushed conversation turned into quiet contemplation, each lost in their thoughts, each grappling with the harsh reality of their existence. The plantation may have been more efficient, but the cost had been their peace, their individuality, and a piece of their souls. They had become part of a well-oiled machine, driven not by the promise of reward, but by the fear of punishment. As dawn broke, they rose, their bodies ready to face another day of relentless toil. Their minds, however, were a different story, for within them, the shadows of fear, despair, and loss had found a permanent home.